thanks for being here. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to moderate this conversation and kind of frame the moment in terms of what we, or at least there are powers that be that are trying to orchestrate an erasure of certain types of stories. And those stories are ones that weren't necessarily at the top of the list in terms of what's distributed, right? So we've got we have four amazing filmmakers, two are a team, and I'm going to allow each of them to give a brief introduction so that you know who's up here. Why don't you start, Anarima?
Hi, I'm Anarima Bhargava. Hi, I'm Anarima Bhargava. I am a recent filmmaker of my first directed film, Teaching America, which is tomorrow as part of the 11 o'clock block, so please come. I come from being a longtime civil rights lawyer, particularly a racial justice lawyer who worked a lot in schools and colleges and universities, and then started executive producing and producing films, and then decided to direct one. So, and in my other hat, I chair the board of Doc Society, which you will hear from at some point during this symposium as well. So, yeah. Byron.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Byron Hurt. I'm a documentary filmmaker, director, and producer, and also I narrate many of the films that I've made. I've made several films for the PBS system, including Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, Soul Food Junkies, Hazing, Lee and Liza's Family Tree, and I just released a new short film called Men of Courage.
My name is William Howell. I am the co-director of the documentary Cycle. I've spent 20 years doing music, and I recently went into videos before I journeyed into filmmaking.
And my name is Laura Diane Kesman. I am also a filmmaker here with Will. Our film Cycle is showing here at DX this weekend. I'm a director, a DP, an editor, and producer, and I have a production company based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin called Lion Art Media.
Wonderful, thank you. And I guess I should say I'm the director of the Documentary Accountability Working Group. I'm really proud to hold that title, to fill that role. Pat Ofterheide, who's another dog member, is in the audience. And there's so many allies in this work that are in this room. And so I'm really excited to, as I said, to have this conversation. So let's get into it. Anarima, your film, Teaching America, gets into part of the fight for an African American Studies AP course in Little Rock, Arkansas. That entire situation feels so prescient right now. Tell us why you decided to tell this story and why it's meaningful in this present climate.
Sure. So one of the things that really struck me is that in conversations around banning of books and the banning of histories, not just Black history, the history of so many people in this country, the silencing and the erasure, that a lot of what we were hearing and seeing were people at school board meetings, some of whom, or most of whom, don't even have kids in the school district, who are yelling and screaming about guilt and hate and shame. And we didn't really have a sense of what was going on in the classroom. And so the reason to make the film is that Arkansas, unlike a few other states around the United States, didn't ban African American studies, but threatened it. And to have a chance to see what it meant to students and how much they had created community around learning and their grace and their brilliance, and to have the world be able to see that and not be afraid of it, but instead recognize how important it is for any kid to have that kind of community was really important, and also to obviously honor the teachers who are creating environments where people who are a lot younger than all of us can have conversations that we're all having a hard time having now.
Thanks for that. Byron, you're also Teaching America in the sense that you are a college professor, and you have taught a variety of courses that deal with the African American or Black experience in this country. share with us what you teach and why you see it as resistance.
Thank you. Well, I teach African Americans in mass media this semester at SUNY Old Westbury, which is a state school on Long Island. And essentially, it's really a media literacy course for college students, but it really sort of drills down into the history of Black representation across all media. And it's a really great class for me to teach, particularly now, because there are so many films that we are watching and analyzing and discussing with each other that were made 30, 40, 50 years ago that are super relevant today because they place us, they locate us in the political environment that we exist today. And so what's been really interesting to me in the experience of teaching this class, at least this semester, is the fact that so many of the young people would not really know about the, I would say, the circumstances or situations that have taken place, historical events that have taken place in this country without taking this class. So, for example, we showed the film Hurricane Katrina, Race Against Time by Tracy Curry, which was executive produced by Ryan Coogler. And I was really, I had to be reminded of the fact that these were babies when Hurricane Katrina happened. And so they had seen many of the images, many clips from Hurricane Katrina, but they really did not know the story about Hurricane Katrina. They didn't know how Black people in New Orleans were framed in the media, how they were treated by law enforcement, how they were treated by government officials. And so watching that series with them in the classroom really connected them to what's happening today in terms of ICE and immigration. And it really sort of gave them a historical context for how a group of people, Black and brown people, can be criminalized, right, and dehumanized in the media in a way that makes it easier for them to be punished and treated as criminals. And so I say all of that to say that there is an attack on these type of courses, right? And many of the government officials, people from the Trump administration, and other right-wing politicians are trying to erase these type of classes and these types of films and these types of books because they don't want students to be able to make those historical connections, to be able to put today's oppression into some sort of social political context. And so it's important that we as filmmakers who also teach the babies so that they understand these connections.
Yeah, thank you. Part of what we know happens, but that we're not really seeing much reporting on, at least I'm not. I don't think mainstream media is really addressing this issue, is police brutality. And so William, you and Laura made a film together called Cycle, which tells the story of a young Black man named Tyrese West, who was murdered by police in Racine, Wisconsin on Juneteenth, no less. This story is particularly personal for you, William. Can you tell us why you decided to document what happened to Tyrese and why his story matters?
Well, for me, growing up in Racine, Wisconsin, I have always been like the voice of my community since I was young. And so for me, it was always music, but I've always had the support of my entire city. And so for me, when Tyrese's picture came down my timeline, it was just like an instant heartbreak for me because his father and I were almost best friends when we were around his age. And so it was just like an instant call to action for me. It was an instant call to action to make sure that I motivated my city, to make sure I kept everybody galvanized, to let them know that this was something that we would not let just go away. Like I have a son that's 28 years old, and I have to live with the fact that if the same thing was happening to him. And so for me, it was just an instant call to action. We wanted to make sure that everybody would not let go of what had happened. And so for me, it was just like this moment of documentation. Like I had no idea about filmmaking. I was literally just a dude who shot videos in the hood. And so for me, it was like it became a moment of just making sure that I documented life as it happened. And so I filmed a funeral, and I filmed a march, And what I noticed was just like this groundswell of support for people who really wanted to galvanize and get behind and hoping that this cop would be charged. So for 96 days, I was on social media and everything that I could do just to keep the word out there. And it took a mutual friend in our city who would see me on social media every day. And she hit me up and she was like, hey, look, I got a friend. She's a filmmaker, and I really think that you two should connect. And that's how me and Laura got connected. But the funny thing was that the reason why that she contacted Laura is because the very night that it happened, her and Laura happened to ride past the very crime scene.
Wow.
And so months later, when she seen me on social media, she was like, well, she had remembered, like, oh, wow, that's what had happened that night. So she contacted her friend and was like, look, you need to, hear his side of the story, hear him. He's very close to the family. And so she decided to let him know, like, reach out to me. And she was willing to give me some pointers because, like I said, I was looking for somebody who knew filmmaking, somebody who could teach me how to tell this story. And so she was like, look, I can give you some pointers. I can show you, how to begin this. And so we had set up to have just a 10-minute, 15-minute coffee break, which turned into 2 hours, because I had already convinced myself that if I was able to sit down with her, then I would not leave that table until she had decided to be my lead director.
I appreciate that, William. Laura, so what motivated you to get involved after that 2-hour conversation in telling Tyrese's story? And, one of the things that you talked about during our prep call was the fact that you both were trying to connect these dots around why this cycle of violence continues. Were you able to connect those dots?
Well, I'll start by saying that it was not 2 hours of persuasion by any means. I think that going into the conversation initially when I met Will, there was an inherent need to learn more about what had happened. Racine, Wisconsin is my hometown. I was born and raised in Racine. And so the fact that we shared that initial connection was really big. And then the additional element of it, which was that my friends and I had, yes, driven by the crime scene, which years later, would hold, all of these answers that we would never get, which haunts me to this day. But I think that one thing that really struck a chord for me initially is that I live in Milwaukee, 30 minutes north of Racine, and it took until 4 months after Tyrese was killed for me to even learn his name. The news had not reached Racine. Yes, people were galvanizing and people were marching in the streets in Racine because it was a tragedy that had happened in our community, but the same thing had happened a year prior in Racine. A young black man was murdered by the police just a year prior under different circumstances. But this time, it struck that nerve, and the community was in a lot of pain, obviously. And the answers that we were trying to ask was just basic, loopholes in the official narrative of what had happened. And so we didn't go into cycle with the intention to unravel this big story and end up essentially creating kind of like a framework for people to better understand how these situations happen with such ease and frequency in perpetuity, particularly in smaller local precincts like Racine, Wisconsin, which, by the way, is consistently ranked and has been for years as one of the worst places in the United States to live for black people. It's one of the most segregated cities behind Milwaukee in the entire country. And so within this very, relevant context to start asking the questions that we did, we started to unpack the layers of how these incidents happen and how, in particular, the narrative is shaped, and how that starts at the crime scene and how that is then disseminated to the public via press releases that the police craft and then the local news reports regurgitate, and that frames public opinion before anyone is even asked a question. So it really was, again, this started in 2019. This was before COVID hit. This is before anyone knew George Floyd's name. This is before, the summer of 2020, triggered this galvanization of awareness in mainstream media across the world. We had a captive audience for a year, where people were coming to terms with the deep issues between communities and law enforcement accountability in this country. And what we did not expect to happen is for Tyrese, which initially we, again, committed to telling his story and making sure that his name was not forgotten. But what ended up happening is Tyrese became this emblem and this symbol of all of the names that you will never know, and all of the names that did not become hashtags, that happen all the time in communities small like Racine, Wisconsin. And so in terms of how we connect the cycle and how it keeps perpetuating, it's very layered. and it's everything from how the narrative is shaped from the crime scene to the friendly relationship, especially in smaller towns, between the district attorney's office and the police departments. It's how local news reports these incidents based on the information that they're given by police. And then it extends to the pain and the endurance that these families have to endure in order to get any semblance of justice. There's a lot more, but yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for laying that out. It's making me think of a couple of things, and Anarima, I'm going to come back to you because I'm thinking about how, what Laura just said, but also what Byron was talking about in terms of young people not really having the context, right, that older people might, that we have, right, because we were alive when a lot of these things were happening. So something like African American Studies AP course seems pretty vital, right, especially in this moment. So I guess what I'm wondering is what sorts of insights did you glean while you were making Teaching America about how young people are feeling? I mean, we see it in the film, but what was your takeaway in terms of what they're feeling about learning this history and it being potentially taken away from them, like just not even being offered for them to wrestle with?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. I will say this. I mean, there's so much I learned. I think that the students in Arkansas, at least for me, saved me in these last 2 years of seeing the ways in which there is such extraordinary intentional divide and conquer and erasure. And so what I would say is that they really think of history as who they are. And so in some ways, when we think of it being something that was in the past, they think of it as how they got to be who they are and how they got to be where they are. And so, and they think of the making of mistakes. Part of what we wanted to show in the film is that, people make mistakes when we're talking about race. We have ways in which we're talking about each other, when we're inquiring about the ways in which we show up in spaces and are trying to sort of figure that out and put that in context that are yesterday and also 100 years ago, and they allowed themselves to make those mistakes, right? And to do so in a way that, like, you make a mistake and you move on. And the last thing I'll say is they speak a lot more clearly and directly about what's going on in this country than most adults that I see, and they know what's going on, right? Like, if there's any question of whether kids in Arkansas, there's so many suppositions that even people who were involved in the film had about kids in Arkansas, and one of the, I think I mentioned this, in our pre-call, but like one of the students in the film, Simone, who's one of my many faves, I met Simone the first day I arrived in Little Rock, and And so Simone is a black trans woman in Arkansas, and she just graduated from Central High School, which is where the Little Rock Nine desegregated, is very much part of that history, has spent a lot of time doing memory projects on the way that history shows up. But the thing I want to say about Simone is that she's taken that and made it an anchor and a jumping off point for theater, for comedy, for the ways in which she's showing up as an artist in the world, and also for how she's transforming how people can look at her and look at the community that they're a part of, and that is so reflected in the fact that Simone, in a high school that is 45% black, 45% white, and 10% students of other backgrounds, was elected by her fellow students to be prom queen, right? And most people wouldn't imagine that about a kid who's in an Arkansas high school right now, right? And so I think we need to allow the space that they find for themselves, and how it is that they're able to express that. And I think that's what I got from them, is they are unapologetically themselves, and unapologetic themselves is history for them.
I love that, and I think that there is a lot of spaciousness that we should give to these young generations, because I agree with you, they do know what's going on, and yet I think that there is a way that the history, the deep history that would really fill in the gaps for them, is being held back, if it's being offered at all. And so, Byron, I'm thinking about your film, Lee and Liza's Family Tree, and how it addresses, a particular void that was created intentionally during slavery. Can you talk about what you learned and your family learned on your path to making the film, and just sort of set up, what happens in that?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm so deep in thought right now. I mean, this is making me think so deeply about where we are currently in our world, in our society. But to answer your question, Lee and Liza's Family Tree is a story about my family's quest to learn more about our oldest known patriarch and matriarch in our family. And we could only go as far back as 1863 because historical records, they didn't exist. I mean, they only took us back to a certain point. And so throughout the film, we see that my family hit various roadblocks, maybe some signs of hope that we can learn more about our oldest known patriarch and matriarch, but we just couldn't do it. And one of the reasons why we couldn't is because their histories were erased. Their histories were not documented. Their histories were not written down, or they weren't passed down enough for people to maintain those records. And so I guess what I'm so deep in thought about is, do we want to go back to that place? Do we want to go back to that time where our history has been completely erased or buried or completely suppressed, that we don't know where we come from? We don't know the true history of this country. And right now, we are in a battle over narratives and who gets to control the narrative of this country, the narrative of the history of this country. And the right does not want young people in general, to know the true history of this country, the history of racism, of sexism, of misogyny, of homophobia, of transphobia. They do not want these stories told. And one of the things that I found so powerful about both of your stories is that without them, I would have never known about the young brother who was killed by the police officer. Without your story, I would not know about this class, this class that was being offered for African American, just students in general, to learn about African American history. And so, if we do not meet this challenge, if we do not do what is required to do what my ancestors have always done, and that is to counter these negative narratives about black people in general, then we're going to lose that battle. And so the decision that I have made and that I am currently in the process of is summoning up the spirit of filmmakers like Oscar Micheaux and Zora Neale Hurston and other filmmakers, storytellers, Melvin Van Peebles, right, who did whatever it took to tell the stories that they wanted to tell about Black people, about the Black experience, about Black history, regardless of the opposition, regardless of the lack of funds or the lack of support. We have to lean into our communities. We have to lean into our support systems to continue to tell the stories about our history in a way that is accurate, that is true, and that is fair.
Thank you so much for that. I really want to, I wish that we could show something from Lee and Liza's family tree. Unfortunately, we cannot. I encourage you to watch that film. It's on Nova, and you could probably find it.
PBS.org.
Thank you.
And on Prime Video.
Yes, yes. But we do have clips from Teaching America and Cycle. So let's do Teaching America first, and then we'll do Cycle. And I'm just going to say, okay, thank you. I'm just going to say while the shades are coming down, that part of what we are hoping this panel will do is not just sort of raise the fact that these stories are being erased, these stories are being deleted, but to leave you with not only the encouragement, but the motivation to keep telling the stories, right? And to also have some context for what is going on legally that might inform how you continue. All right, let's go.
Able to learn about our history. How dare we not be able to learn about our history?
I had friends who signed up for the class come to me when it happened, and they were like, "Are you still gonna take it? I heard we're not gonna get any points."
Our Governor Sanders, she went to Central herself. It's like she's erasing history from her own school, which doesn't make sense to me.
We can't learn about the amazing inventors. We can't learn about the politicians that were put down. We can't learn about people exceeding in mathematics.
Okay, can we also do Cycle?
It just keep on replaying in my head, like my son on his hands and his knees looking at Eric Geezy and pleading for his life. And my baby probably already knew he finna kill me.
Mama! I can't breathe! 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 I can't breathe!
You don't get to change these moments. It's moments like this that change you. And there we stood, right there in the middle of it. I described it as the most peaceful display of destruction I had ever witnessed. This is America's reflection staring back at me through every piece of broken glass.
Mama!
I realized how traumatized I really was already. It was a pressure point for a system working in slow motion, and a call to every open heart.
So I just want you to know that Teaching America is going to be featured tomorrow at 11 during one of the shorts blocks, and Cycle will be screening Sunday. I'm not sure what time. 4:15. Okay, at the Naval Heritage Center. Anarima, you wanted to say something real quick?
Yeah, one that I thought I was doing like a 30-second clip, so that you got a little taste. But I also just wanted to say something about what we're doing here, right? Which to me, like one of the things that was really important about Teaching America was these kids are telling their own story, right? And I think there's something really important about the show Don't Tell in this moment, right? Which is, and we'll get to this at some point, right, in this conversation, is the ways in which people are talking to us about how we shouldn't be telling Black and brown stories. But there are stories, and I think part of it is what's the way in which we create space for communities, for families, for young people to tell their own stories. and it's incredibly powerful when we do that, which is what what we were trying to do in Arkansas.
Thank you for that. William and Laura, I wanted to come back to you, especially since we saw the clip from Cycle last. William, one of the things that you mentioned during our prep call is this idea of Black trauma, and that you feel like it's not understood. Can you talk about how Cycle potentially addresses this issue, and ultimately does Tyrese's story offer us something more than trauma? Does it take us beyond trauma to perhaps joy and healing?
Well, I think the first thing that we all have to realize is that everything that we as Black Americans experience when we watch our televisions, and everything that we digest down our timelines that tell us we mean less as a race, these things are all forms of psychological warfare. Cycle was made with the intention of being not only a guide, but a psychological advantage for Black America that has never existed in this manner. And so for me personally, like, my uncle was the chief of police when this happened. And when you're thinking of the trauma, look at it like the movie Sixth Sense. And you got this little boy, he tell him, I see dead people. And the man is like, okay, let me help you with that. Never knowing the whole time that he's the dead one, And it's the same with me and Laura. I was looking for somebody to, of course, help me with this film, to tell this truth. I was anxious for justice, but not knowing the whole time, I was just as traumatized as everybody else. But me just being who I am, I'm just like the frog boiling in water, you know what I mean? Like, so it was all just natural to me. But for her to be able to see everything from such an outside perspective and to even see what I was going through, because this happened in 2019. We didn't premiere until this year, 2025. So that's 6 years. And within that, it was like maybe 2 years where she didn't even see me, because like I had became so frustrated and I was so angry at everything that I had literally in my soul, I walked away. And in those moments, like, she carried me. She could have literally said, well, this ain't my issue, and walked away as well. But she decided that it was her issue and that it was her story to tell and that she wasn't going to give up on me. And that's what I mean when you say Black trauma, and us understanding that, because there was times where we argued and fought because I had no understanding, for one, of filmmaking, the process, or just the trauma that I was experiencing within this situation. And so for me, I think it becomes a point of we need good white people who actually care. Like, she took the time to care about William. She didn't just want to come and, okay, have somebody to help me make this film. Once we met, she decided that, okay, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that he becomes a filmmaker, that he can tell these stories of everything that happens in his community, in his neighborhood. I'm going to amplify his voice. But at the same time, she gave me the time that I needed to be able to, go through my own cycles. And so for me, I think that's very important when I hear a lot of the people that spoke up here on these panels and stuff about Black films and like the power in these films and how people are trying to take them away and things like that. But you need people who are actually on the ground in these environments, in these communities, every day with these people, just like Laura decided to do. And so for me, it's like, it's so vital, because there's moments where she was literally just capturing everything that happened without any kind of bias. And I realized that even in those moments, like, I can be biased to my own people. Like, there was times I cut my camera off just because I'm like, man, they acting silly. But she didn't see it that way. She was literally just intaking this entire community and environment with no biases. And so when I would see some of that footage play back, where even I was like, it was amazing to see how powerful it is from the person who's actually filming it. And so for me, like, that's what it is. I want people to deal with Black trauma with more love and more respect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, as director and a member of DOG, more importantly, a member of DOG, which, put together what we call From Reflection to Release framework for values, ethics, and accountability in nonfiction filmmaking. this is a really interesting thing that you're bringing up. Like, and you use the term outsider, I think, for Laura in terms of the story, because the story is about a young black man, right? And the impact of his murder, which has ramifications for the larger black community, right? But her viewpoint as someone who is not a part of that community, right? Laura, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, but I think you can run with me. This insider-outsider tension, right? You know, there's a lot of talk about whether or not someone who is not in a community can tell that story. What did you learn through this process about yourself as someone who is not a part of the community? And also, like, how you know, the care is needed, right? Especially when there is trauma. And I'm really looking forward to watching Cycle to see how that was treated. From what I've heard, you treat it very well, both of you. But I'm really interested in how you wrestled with this insider-outsider dynamic that doesn't always go well, and certainly doesn't always result in co-directors, right? Someone who is from the community working with someone who is not.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of that perspective has been now, like, the opportunity I've had to reflect on that since we premiered in May. But I think foundationally, you know, day one of filming this story, I met Monique West, Tyrese's mom, and the relationship that I was able to form with Mo in the family and Tyrese's siblings, it was a very fast-tracked, like bonding that we had, you know. And so even during, you know, the times that, you know, Will needed to step away from the project, you know, like, you know, I never missed a birthday party, you know, like there was a closeness and a trust that I took very, very seriously. And so it, you know, I often ask myself the same questions, you know, because there was never a question in my mind, do I keep going or not? It was just, it felt like kind of like a force bigger than me pulling me along, and I just had these blinders on for 6 years. To the detriment of, like, other things in my life. You know, it just, there wasn't a question. I felt like there were a lot of, you know, forces at play that, you know, I just happened to possess this skill set that can help channel this story that did not start with Tyrese, but having the reverence of, like, how far back this story goes, and in a responsibility that I felt to bring that context, especially to my family members, my friends, all of my, you know, like the individuals who were so shocked and surprised when George Floyd happened. Like, to me, I felt like it was a responsibility of, like, not just ensuring that Tyrese's name doesn't get lost among the thousands of others we'll never know, but it was like crafting this in a historical, contextual way to see that, like, this is not new. This cycle has been happening since the founding of our country, since law enforcement started, and we go that far back in the film. And providing that context was critical, and I think that at the foundation of it for me was listening and being humble to the process. We didn't know that this was going to be a 6-year production process, post-production. You know, we didn't know what we were in for. We didn't know that in 2025 the world will look the way that it does, and Will and I get to sit here and talk with you right now. Like, none of this was foreseen. And so the fact that we're here, I just feel incredibly humbled and grateful that, you know, we made it. And Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly the answer you're looking for, but we're running. I don't know.
No, we will take it. Thank you for that. Byron, I'm thinking about your body of work, the types of stories that you tell. In this moment, well, first of all, can you talk a little bit about why you have chosen to basically focus your whole career on stories that operate at the center of race, or the intersection of race, gender, and class, but also, given something like cycles, something like Teaching America, I guess what I'm really wondering is, like, how are you seeing storytelling, besides what you said earlier, in this moment as it reflects your work? And how do you thread that needle in such a precarious moment?
When I was in college, I took a class called Blacks in the Media and the Press. And it's ironically very similar to the class that I'm teaching now, African Americans in Mass Media. And in that class, I watched the work of Marlon Riggs, who was an extraordinary filmmaker who dealt with issues around race, sexuality, gender. And I was really, really transformed by his work. And I was able to watch his work in class, but I also saw and recognized that his work was aired or broadcasted on PBS. And so I decided that I wanted to be a filmmaker because I wanted to have the same kind of impact on young people that Marlon Riggs had on me. And so PBS then became sort of like my channel. It became my vessel to tell the kind of stories that Marlon Riggs told, but from my perspective. And so I wasn't just impacted or influenced by Marlon Riggs. There were other people, but Marlon Riggs was the person who sort of gave me the motivation and the spark to tell important stories about the Black experience. But I will say this, there are so many others, right? When I think about Ida B. Wells, when I think about other writers like Gil Noble, who was a reporter who directed a TV show called Like It Is. In Boston, there was a show called Basic Black that really covered issues affecting the Black community. These were all TV shows and other figures who had an impact on me, who influenced me. And so I guess the point I'd like to make with that is that I come from, and we all come from, a legacy of journalists and storytellers who have been bold and have been courageous. And I'm calling for everyone in this room, if you are a journalist or if you are a storyteller or a documentary filmmaker, to call up the spirit of your ancestors, call up the spirit of the journalists and the documentary filmmakers that have inspired you, that you looked up to, that you admired, and become them. To walk in their shoes or stand on their shoulders and create the work and tell the stories that this country, that the right is trying so hard, so desperately to suppress. So walk with courage, walk with strength, walk with fear, and understand and know that the right put on their pants or their skirts the same way that we do, okay? And the only difference is that right now, in this current political climate, in this current point in time in history, they have power and we do not. What we have to do is go back and we have to reclaim our power, and we have to continue to tell stories that reflect the world that we live in with truth and honesty and integrity and with ethics, so that we can tell the true story of the American story.
I appreciate that, yeah. I want to open it up for questions in just one moment, but I wanted to end with you, Anarima, because you have this background in civil rights and in the law. And I'm wondering how you would frame this moment for storytellers along those lines. What do we need to know, and what can we sort of arm ourselves with in terms of the power that we do have, so that we can do what Byron just talked about?
Sure. So I do actually think we have a lot of power in this moment through our stories, right? And I think part of the effort by so many is to suggest that the law is a valid way in which to take account of who we are in this country. And the law, humanity and all of us are way too messy for the law, and we're way too messy for any of the sort of slots that people are putting us into. And I think in some ways, so part of what we're seeing is this massive, obviously, attack on anything that resembles, whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion, and DEI, whether it be race, whether it be gender, whether it be, at the moment, class, or even like having being the working poor and trying to actually just to survive in this country. The idea that we're making healthcare, it's a healthcare versus eating food moment that we're in this week is just, all of those things are ways in which the notion that we have to abide by someone telling us that I'm gonna suppress this through the law. My response to it is that, like, I think just what I said at the very beginning, which is like, these are not black and brown stories. These are our stories, and we should tell them, in plentiful form, and we should have as many storytellers being able to be engaged in that as possible. Natalie and I are both from Chicago, and it's a different kind of hell right now in the city. And one of the things I just want to say about filmmaking in this moment is, when I think about what's happening in Chicago, I think about young people really standing up. So I want to also take the energy of our young people. So I'm not even taking the energy necessarily of just our ancestors. It's also of our young people right now, and how do we get that out there? But I also would say, like, the thing about storytellers is most stories, most narratives, most media narratives are about a moment of violence, and we debate the moment of violence. But we don't talk about what led up to that moment of violence, and we don't talk about what comes after that moment of violence, right? And so we need to be able to give ourselves and our stories a chance to breathe. And I think that's part of what we do as documentary filmmakers and as storytellers, is to give our stories a chance to breathe. And so I use a couple examples. Perfect Neighbor, which is on Netflix right now, gives us
Geeta Gandabir.
Geeta Gandabir's directorial and masterpiece, right? I mean, it's just, and part of it is to show something that was an extraordinarily horrible murder of Ajika Owens, but to give you all the sense of what led up to that, right? And the dignity and humanity that comes from seeing a community and seeing the kids in that community and what it must have done to all of them, right? And we think about something like Surviving R. Kelly. It gives you a sense of the ways in which violence was perpetrated over and over and again in a way that makes it irrefutable what the harm and the violence is, right? And so the ways that we tell our stories that allow them to have a chance to breathe, that allow them to be placed in an ecosystem, not only should we not allow someone to suggest that the law has anything to say about the telling of our stories, I also think that we have to be vigilant about the fact that the law has nothing to tell us about the context that we give our stories and the ecosystem in which they are placed.
Thank you for that. Okay, questions? Yes, I see you back there. Is there?
Thank you. This has been really, really enlightening. For context, hi, my name is James May. I'm a local journalism grad student, and I'm a freelance journalist. I had a question more about, like, reporting on minority communities that you are not a part of. For example, I'm currently working on a video story about H Street here in DC, which is a historically black neighborhood, and the dominant narrative in the past has been like, oh, this is like a crime-ridden area, but like, that's not the case. Like, right now, like, they did have some issues with that, but like, right now they're like thriving, and like, we're not thriving, they're still struggling with some other things, but it's very nuanced. And I'm just like trying to do the story justice and do this community justice. And I want to go about it in an ethical and responsible way. But but like at the same time, like I recognize very much like I am a white person. I have a lot of that privilege. So I've been trying to, get as many sources as I can to talk about this and to talk about the experiences. But I was just wondering if you had any more tips on kind of reporting these things out and doing these types of stories from an outsider's perspective.
Thank you for that. I would love for everyone to take, to answer that, or whoever would like to, but I would just like to say really quickly that one of the things that the Documentary Accountability Working Group's framework lifts up is something called reflection, which is phase 1 of all of the phases of production. But we've codified phase 1 because we believe that's something that filmmakers, and we can say more broadly storytellers, do in general. But what we try and encourage filmmakers in particular to think about is, what biases do you have, right? Let's be honest. Let's do some introspection before we even begin to tell a story, especially if it's a story that is not our own. So that's where I would say start. Just try and really get in touch with, okay, what are the narratives that I believe, and why do I believe them? Where does that come from? And do a little bit of deconstruction of that, right? And I think that will help to open up your mind to what the people that you are interviewing might have to say about the community that you're telling a story about. Anybody else?
Yeah, I would say just be open to the community. Like just like how you came here today, like you took the first step. That showed that you care. You cared enough to say that I know that I'm privileged and I might not go through the things that they have, but I'm still here to tell this story passionately. That's the same way that you want to come across to the people that you see there. Like, you just want to be able to connect with them. It doesn't matter where you're from or any of that. It just matters, like, what are your intentions? If you have good intentions and you really care about what you're doing, then people will realize that. And one thing about black people, when you step into their environment, they're going to always be welcoming. Like, they don't feel like they own America, like some places where we going to go and what we experience. So if you just open your mouth and speak to them the same way you just spoke to us, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have somebody to spill their whole entire life to you, especially if they see you there doing something that normally somebody isn't doing, especially somebody of your race. So I think you already ahead of the game. Just like go back to that same environment, go back to that same place. And if it's me, I just dwell in it. Like, I really just start to capture the beauty of it. And then you let people see that, and you talk to those people, or you let them people talk to you, and it'll take you where you need to be.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Hope that helped.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm Walter Jacob. I'm a local writer-producer. I have a question primarily for Anarima, although I guess anybody could chime in on the broader idea involved. It's really about access and the challenges of doing a documentary project, especially in a climate where people in power may not want you to come in and show what's going on. I also worked on a schools-based documentary project some time ago and saw some of the challenges of getting permission to film in a classroom, getting permission from the teacher involved, getting permission from the parents to show the kids on the screen. And I just wondered if you could talk about what you encountered and how you navigated that, and if anybody else has comments on getting access, that would also be interesting.
Sure. I don't really know how I got as blessed and as lucky as I did, but I'll give you a little bit of the context, right? Which is, I was a civil rights lawyer here at the Justice Department and at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for years, and I had a lot of desegregation cases, including the desegregation case in Little Rock. And so when I heard about what was going on in Arkansas, there were people who were like, we have relationships, let's go down there. And I got a blanket no, right? Like, there's a media circus, there's death threats, it's just no one's coming into film. And so I thought I would just go down there. And and start to try and talk to folks and see who just friends who were there, and how do I like make some connections. And I think, just going back to the question, even from the woman who was talking about H Street, like, to me, what basically happened is I showed up there without a sense of, like, not only reflecting on my own bias, but also on my own intent, right? Like, and I think coming in and going there, and they realize, like, oh, you've actually spent time here, right? Like this is not like I'm coming in for a 2-week story and walking out of here. And that's the reason I got access, and I got access to schools, multiple schools, but it took time, right? And I think, there was a lot of time just spent hanging out, and particularly with kids, trying to, like, just get them to open up, right? And joke around and all the rest. And so, I think that's the piece of this that was important. And I'm going to use this, Natalie, in a very quick way to say something about that I meant to say about the legal part of this. I just wanted to say to everyone in the room, I mean, there are people here who've heard me say this many times, that the people in power who don't want us to tell stories aren't really paying as much attention as we think they are. Like, this isn't a moment of, they don't want us telling our stories at all, right? And so we're spending all this time trying to suggest that, like, there's a way that we could tell the story, or there's a way that we could show up that would actually be palatable to people. They don't want us to show up at all, right? So to me, like, what's going on in this country is every single school district, every single college and university is getting something that says you shouldn't be teaching really broad terms, you shouldn't be teaching anything that would make anyone feel uncomfortable. Well, that's just ridiculous. I mean, it's a ridiculous moment that we're having, right? So I think part of what we should do is to continue to do the things that we're doing and stop the process of trying to figure out what it is that people in power might want us to tell a story about, and what they don't. And I think here, this is not a story that I wanted to make about politics, right? Like, it's a story about young people who stood up, and had a lot of courage that we've seen over many decades in Little Rock to stand up for learning. And so I think that's the political part of it sort of dropped out for me, because it doesn't mean that, like, I am so worried about those kids and there are things that they said that, like, I want to be really careful about, and took it out, right? Like, I don't need them challenging this administration right now, right? Because it would just not, I mean, I don't need that. But that's not necessary to tell this story. And I think there was another way that you could tell it, which is, like, young people, fighting power. Instead, we want to tell a story of young people wielding power.
Anyone? Okay. Yes, next.
I guess I just have a couple of comments, and I'll try to end with my voice up so it sounds like a question. First, I just want to say, William, something that you said made me think about this new book by Tremaine Lee, if you know about it, called 1,000 Ways to Die. And he writes about being a journalist, often, although not always, in Black communities, and the way that he realized after years of doing that he had internalized so much of the trauma that he was supposed to just sort of be reporting from a distance. And so some of what you said just reminded me of what he's been out there talking about with his book. The other thing I just wanted to say is that I kind of feel like, I forgot which person on the panel said this about the kids kind of connecting the historical dots to the present, but I think the reason that I think two things. The reason that there's so much, the push is on to not be teaching that stuff is, it's not just teaching history, like in the case of Black people, but also what white people did. I think that's a lot of what they don't want taught. It's not just what the Black history is, but it's the white history, and the connecting of because they're trying to go back to a time when what we now see as history is going to be now, and for people to be able to connect the dots that what that was not right, and kept on perpetuating injustice, would be a very scary thing for those who want to go back to that time to have young people understand. So I think what they're trying to wipe out is the recognition of systems. And that's what connecting the dots is. Dots add up to a system. And that's what we learn from history. And that is what I think this is all about, is trying to erase systems and not just individual events.
Right, erase the information that would allow us to make those
To see the
connections.
system.
Yes, yeah. Anybody want to?
I mean, I think that's the importance of somebody like me and Laura working together. Like, it takes away all the biases. And like I said, like when I got ready to make the film, I told myself I didn't want to make this film because I knew it would be an angry film. And I wanted somebody who wasn't from the community, but that could still relate, that would feel the pain without, being embedded inside of it. And so for me, I think it's vital for all of us to work together. Like there's no other answer.
I also think they want to erase our own power, right? I mean, it's erase the systems, but it's also erasing the fact that we have power. So I do think that that's a lot of what we see from young people is they're learning about their own power. And that's what and the kids say that that's what people are most afraid of.
Laura?
And one thing I just wanted to sort of echo what you said is that, which is an extension of the answer to your original question, Natalie, is that, I mean, my background is in journalism. And while there was the personal conviction and responsibility to tell this story, it was really, the pursuit of truth of what happened, but also it was the pursuit to deconstruct this white system, to help provide the context and connect those dots. And I was just looking at it from the personal standpoint, like, will my uncle in Green Bay understand why a kid like Tyrese West would run from the police if he watches this film? And that was a big driving factor for me, was to help neutralize the questions that white people oftentimes ask the most. Well, why did he run? He had a gun, didn't he? And just perpetuating the unhelpful stereotypes of what happened. But you have to go all the way back to the roots of our law enforcement in this country to understand the context of why that is the way that it is. So thank you for bringing that point up, because that was also, again, a huge motivating factor of why the 6 years, there was never a negotiation in my mind of why this needed to be told in the way that we ended up telling it.
Byron, did you want to? Any other questions? Yes, Marjan?
Okay, I just want to say to Byron, thank you for bringing up Marlon Riggs. I don't know if you saw, if that was Tongues Untied or his second film.
I saw Color Adjustment, Tongues Untied, Ethnic Notions, Black Is,
Right.
Black Ain't. Yeah.
I just want to give a little historical context. I was at PBS when Tongues Untied went on the air. It was hell after that. But, I'm just so happy it had an impact, even though we were going through hell and Mapplethorpe was here in D.C. and Jesse Helms was raging on. So I think this addresses my question about backlash. Because, and I just had another little moment, because I just finished over the summer, a discussion guide for becoming Thurgood, America's Social Architect. And one of the things he mentioned in this oral history he did before he retired was that they didn't anticipate the backlash of the 1954 decision, Brown versus Board of Education, and those multiple cases. And Central High School was part of that backlash they didn't see coming. I think right now we're in a backlash. What makes it unique is that the technology has changed. It's much more challenging to get a message out. How do you see us addressing, getting our stories out and getting through this backlash? What does the other side look like to you?
I think my mic has been cut. Is it still on? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I mean, we're definitely in experiencing a backlash, and I think that backlash is a result of the years of progress in addressing and attacking these systems and making some sort of, creating some sort of change for a variety of different groups. But I just think that we need to, continue to use and master the tools that are out there. And to your point earlier about young people, following the lead of young people, I think that is the case, that we should do that. I mean, young people are using social media in ways that are completely immersed in storytelling. And if we continue to, I guess, follow their lead and use their example of how they're using social media, I think that that's really powerful. Creating our own mechanisms of getting our stories out there, I think is also going to have to become the way. We can't rely on federal funds, federal resources, or institutions that have been supported by federal dollars anymore. We have to create our own platforms. We have to use whatever a means of distribution to get our work out there, right? So that's what I'm in the process of doing, and I think that's what we have to do as storytellers.
And I'm just going to wrap it up with one last thought, which is I want to uplift something that the longtime Impact producer and co-founder, co-executive director of Color Congress, Sonia Childress, wrote almost 10 years ago, but it still applies. And it's an article called Beyond Empathy. And basically what Sonia is asserting is that we often do storytelling in order to, quote unquote, humanize other people, as opposed to dealing with the systems that oppress us all. And there's solidarity that can be had in us exposing those systems, because as I think you said, there's a way that they oppress all of us. We are all in the same boat, to differing degrees for sure, but that's what we need is solidarity. And I personally believe that if we can get beyond, if we can really expose these systems, maybe we can break the cycle of backlash. Thank you. Yeah.